Welcome to the Gardening Summit. Welcome to the first live Q&A with Dr. Barre and Deborah Lando from Alpha Vedic. And these two humans are pretty extraordinary. I was introduced to them just quite recently, actually, when we were putting the Gardening Summit together. And I was really inspired by their work. I was inspired by Barre's work as a doctor, and he was an athlete and really tenacious about being in a peak health state. And through his journey, he came to farming and gardening, which I thought was really interesting. And he has partnered with his wife, Deborah, who's a master gardener and a permaculture champion. And together they've created this, what I would consider an oasis in an off-grid environment where they are growing their own food. They're mentoring others to grow their own food, and to really, more than that, really work with nature and really learn about nature, learn about the wisdom of nature and the wisdom of our connections within ourselves, and also attuned to what I might call the beauty of life, the evolution of us being here on this planet Earth, and what that might look like, and how working with nature and working with our hands in the soil up levels our health, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. So welcome, 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 Deborah and Barre.
Thank you very much. We're happy to be here.
Yes, and we're honored to have the invite and meet you all. Thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome. So Barre, I'm really curious about so you were practicing chiropractics way back in the day, right?
Actually, I started in conventional emergency medicine. I did my pre-med, and then I went into pre-med because of my sports background. I just want to know more about how the body worked. And after a few years working in emergency medicine, I went to naturopathic college and specialized in Chinese medicine, classical homeopathy, and a number of other things. Then went to chiropractic college finally, and then studied classical German bioterrain medicine. So for 40 years, I had a practice, an international clinic where we specialize in bioterrain medicine. And if people don't understand what bioterrain medicine is, it's basically understanding the internal ecology of the human and its principles and mechanisms working identical to the outside ecosystem. So it's just a natural segue into farming.
Thank you for that. And my apologies, because I did know this about you. I just had a blank hole in my brain where I couldn't pull that information. So I don't know if anyone else on this call can relate to this. I had a pretty severe brain injury in 2003, and it's gotten a lot better. This is the biggest, and this week. And these summits are the biggest amount of capacity that I've had in 20 years. And so two takeaways from that. One is I really believe our bodies are always healing themselves. And my sister said it on the phone to me the other day. She said, Natalie, I think your memory is actually getting better. And you might laugh, yeah, because I just like blipped up introducing Barre. And at the same time, it's really, really true. Like even 3 years ago, there's no way I would have been able to host this event and bring these people together and do all the work that we do at Heart and Soil with Leslie. So my apologies, Barre. And it's also just
no, it's not a blip at all. And just so you know this, I take pieces of paper hanging on the wall without any I don't hold them in esteem at all. What I am proud of is just learning what I've learned by putting my hands in the dirt.
Yeah, amen to that. Thank you for that. And so the other piece I wanted to go with that though is that is uh it's gone. But the other piece I wanted to really share with that is because one was that was the healing process of the body and of the brain. And then the other piece was is just meeting yourself where you're at. Like just be in grace with yourself in the garden and in life, because that is where the magic happens. So thank you for your grace and thank you for being in the room. So how did you discover though, Bear, that farming was a natural segue for you? Because a lot of doctors, they never get their hands dirty. You'll never see soil underneath their nails. So what was it about what you were learning that turned you towards food and terrain?
Well, all the modalities that I learned were very helpful tools, but the real connection was when I learned classical German microscopy, and I started looking for hours and hours and decades at microbes under the microscope. And what I found is that, by just visualizing firsthand, it really is an ecology. And rather than treating disease or germs, which in our philosophy isn't the problem, we learned how to bring that ecology, back into balance, and then very serious illnesses, problems would, normally abate. And also, I grew up in a family where we're recent immigrants. My grandparents were from South America and Italy. And so I grew up with everybody in the family pitching in the family garden and growing in the orchard. And so it was, that sort of thing wasn't foreign to me. They were just really adept at that, in the old country, and they brought that over with them. And the last thing too is I practice a lot of herbology. And in my studies of old school herbology, the real masters back in the day, they all had their physic garden, they called it, where they felt very adamant about, if you don't grow your own herbs, then you really, don't have enough skin in the game. You really aren't going to learn the personality of each herb, what it's about, and really how to apply it medically. And especially in this day and age, if you get your herbs somewhere else, they're questionable depending on what part of the world they come from. So I very early on started growing my own. And I guess that was pretty much, how I segued in, but it's really been part of my life forever.
So what are your favorite herbs to grow? Like if you were to share with us, start growing these herbs, what would those be if there was just maybe like a top 3 or 4?
So here at the farm, we have a signature herb. We grow a lot of herbs. There's the old standbys, the comfrey, the golden seal, the ginseng, and all those sorts of things. But our signature herb crop here, and we have rows and rows and rows of these trestles where these vines called gynostemma, or the Chinese medical name is jiao gulan. And jiao gulan, I think, is probably the superior adaptogen of all the herbs, or what we loosely call adaptogens this day, because it does so many things. And it's once it's in the ground, it's a rhizome. And we have cold winters here, but it's coming up right now. We don't have to do anything. It's been planted here for years, so it's already growing up. The trellis about this high. By the end of the season, it'll just be thick hedges everywhere, and we harvest that. So we really specialize in that one, but we have herbs growing everywhere. And Deb, you can maybe address any others you can think of.
Well, my latest trend, if you will, or latest passion, we're creating a whole new area right now for medicinal herb garden, strictly that. But we're going, I don't want to use any more hybridized plants. I've done a lot of, Bear and I together, but we've owned 2 nurseries, retail plant nurseries. We've had a lot of great mentors over the years, but for myself and my study in native plants, I think that whatever region you're in, that's the thing to seek out. That even if you're an expert or you're a beginner, find someone, a teacher somewhere where they're leaning to the herbs of that region, because so many of them are disappearing also during this time. We're losing a lot of them. So if you can find seeds, if you can find starts, I can't encourage people enough to seek out
I grabbed all these things.
native herbs of that area.
I love that advice. You know, when I first moved to Saskatchewan, so I grew up on the West Coast, and you can grow food. We can grow food there almost year round, really quite easily. And if we can't, there's just a few minutes, they feel like minutes and years, months, that which is like the shoulder season. But we still have a lot of kale and potatoes and carrots and beets and all the storage vegetables and squash. So there's still this bounty of good organic food. And here in Saskatchewan, in southeastern Saskatchewan, it's hard to find fresh food, let alone organic food in the winter months. And one of the things I've leaned into hard out here is finding the native species and putting those in our diets. And, you know, we always kind of ate weeds growing up, but it's a whole different level when you're looking at actually what grows to feed yourself. Yeah. So people in the room here, I think, are really curious about permaculture and biodynamics and what you've been practicing. And what would you say to the beginner gardener who's just starting out, aside from growing herbs? What else would you say to really consider when they're looking at planning and planting their edible landscapes?
Well, for myself, very early on, I realized the first nursery that I had was in the year 2000. And young women in particular were coming in and saying, I have a black thumb, I kill everything. What do? I want a garden. I don't know how. And I would really encourage them. And I realized that at that time, that the break in the family matrix, whereas I learned mine, I came from a dairy and cattle ranching families in Northern California. So we had a deep relationship with the land. And so gardening was I was just taught that by my family, by my grandparents, my great grandparents, and my own parents. And so to see that break, I would just encourage women, particularly because it wasn't usually men that came in, you know, with that desire, to just get out there, talk to a neighbor that you see has a beautiful garden. Gardeners are so generous with their knowledge and their wisdom. And that's the way that was always passed down, was through, people around you. It was just a given. Mm-hmm. And post World War II began, things that got more commercialized fertilizer and so forth. But there's still a tremendous amount of avid gardeners. And I would just say, whatever you do, even if it's sprouting sprouts in your kitchen sink, grow something, try. And we all, by the way, everybody kills something. So that's a given. Don't be afraid about that either. So just get out there. There's classes, the Master Gardener programs are in every state, and they're rich with information. And even if you're a novice or you're not a gardener at all, it's well worth taking the classes. And they're wonderfully arranged, and they start with the fundamentals and build, and there's always something to learn. I don't care what level of gardener you are. There isn't a day that doesn't pass by that we don't learn something. Mm-hmm. So just get out there, be bold. So plant herbs, be bold, experiment. Know that you'll kill something. What about some of your favorite plant combinations? What are some of those? Well, when it comes to, I don't know if you've ever heard of a woman named Rosalind Creasy. She was the one in 82. She and her husband had traveled extensively around the globe, and she came back to America and said, America is one of the only nations she could see where people kept their landscape and their food separate from each other. She said all the other nations that she traveled in around the world, things grew together. So we now in America call it companion planting. That's one level of it. But don't, and people now are taking out lawns and replacing things. I just say, just look at your yard differently and make way for food. I've taught it a lot, edible landscaping, and there's so many fun things. One thing I'll throw one thing out there. Strawberry plants make a great border plant or an edging if you're going to have a pathway. Edge your path with strawberries. They're wonderful and they're hardy. And that's just one simple example, but start thinking out of the box. If you don't like something or it's suffering, replace it with go to a native plant nursery and bring in a native plant, a native shrub, because the native shrubs versus the shrubs that you can buy just in a nursery, a typical landscape shrub, they provide 20 times more food and supply to the native pollinators. You will attract more native pollinators with your native plants than you will a landscape shrub. So that's a beginning. Start to transition some of your plant material.
In the permaculture world, we talk about food forest all the time. And just one example of that is, we have fruit trees around our acreage everywhere, and every fruit tree provides a canopy for other food crops below it. One interesting one that we did last fall is we got spores for some mushrooms. We just call them giant garden mushrooms because they're huge, and they're very edible. They're great. So mushrooms, can become part of a food forest. So what we did is we get the spores for these mushrooms, and we create kind of a sandwich where we put layers of different composts and things, with the spores, and layer it up. And then what happens is that creates good soil when the mushrooms are taking hold under the fruit tree around the peripheral. And so not only do you have the mushrooms, but they're creating great compost and creating soil at the same time. So it's a great compatibility, to give food and then also to create soil for not only the tree, but the rest of the plants that you plant there. And also mushrooms, of course, can be very handy in decontaminating the soil. Now, we live in a very pristine area, but still there's stuff falling from the sky these days. And, that is a concern, and any serious farmer will relate to you that they're noticing their plants doing strange things these days. When you have an abundance of mushrooms, and especially microorganisms, they're going to, really detoxify the soil. And that's part of what I learned, in my medicine by looking under the microscope, is that the microorganisms that are indigenous to the human organism are no different than the organisms, the soil-based organisms. And in fact, there's even a resonance between the external ecology, especially when you live in more of a natural environment where you're not cut off from that. There's a resonance, real, resonance that can be measured between the microbes in your body, especially in your gut, that has a great impact on your nervous system, and the soil-based organisms. So then when you eat that food, of course, you're not only getting soil-based organisms that are good for your own gut health, but you're in constant resonance, internal and external. And in the practice of bioterrain medicine, especially acupuncture, Chinese medicine, we understand that all disease does start when you have, those imbalances in the microbial populations. So it's, and then acupuncture is really about creating a link, or reestablishing a link, which should always be there, between your internal energy systems and the energy systems outside. And that's, it all plays into it. So when you're out there with your hands in the soil, you really get more attuned and sensitive to these things to the point where you don't even need a doctor. You just, it becomes very intuitive.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bear. Can you just go into that a little bit more? Help us pull that, connect the dots a little bit more, because what I'm hearing you say is the soil's terrain is mimicking. It's exactly like our terrain, more or less. And so can you help us link why, like what it is, how we grow our food and how that impacts the terrain of the food that we're growing and the food that we're putting into our bodies and how that impacts our health?
In the hermetic sciences, and I do a lot of laboratory work when I'm, I'm an old spagyricist. I have a spagyris lab, which is a more advanced form of herbology. But the saying in that world is as above, so below. So we understand that the same exact patterns happen from the heavens above to the ground below, and we are, an inseparable part of nature. So the mechanisms are identical, and the microbes are identical. So that is, what you learn is to bring yourself, when you bring yourself into balance, what you're really doing is bringing yourself in harmony with the external environment. And of course, when you do that, then not only does your health improve, but you become very conscious of your practices when you're farming, and you are always thinking generations ahead as far as, how will this impact, my grandchildren and great grandchildren. And that level of consciousness really needs to come back. And those microorganisms are the little worker bees in the soil that break down the minerals so that the plant rootlets can uptake them. And then the plants themselves chelate. That means they conjugate the minerals with other factors, proteins, so that when we eat plants, we get all of our minerals in a bioavailable form. So the same thing when you're working with the body, that's what I've specialized in, is looking at those microbes so that they were doing the same job in the body for us as they do out in the soil there.
So, and that is one of the reasons we want to stay away from chemical fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides, because when we use those, they kill all those microorganisms, correct?
Yes. And in bioterrain medicine, we have a classification of remedies. They're called isopathics, which are the little seed forms of the microorganisms that live inside of us. And when I look at somebody's blood and there's an abundance of those in a certain primitive stage, that means there's good health there. That means your immune system is healthy and strong. And it also means that if there's a job to do, they're lying in wait to do it. And same thing in the soil, when you study people like Victor Schauberger and his Vortex technology, we have Vortex fertilizer makers where we use very little amounts of fertilizer, but we vortex it, and it creates an abundance of these microorganisms. So you're always putting microorganisms back in the soil, back in the body.
Super cool. And that's like biodynamics. That's one of the reasons they make the vortexes and stirring the preparations, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
And go ahead, please.
No, finish. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that, there's something that's been well known for ages. You want to speak about it?
Yeah. One thing on bears in my journey is that, we always knew the relationship. To us, the original relationship is the human body with nature, because every plant that nature has gifted us with has some sort of effect on the human body. And primarily healing, of course, but it does a wide scope of, it gives us a wide scope of gifts. So when we were we've, shut down our private practice and we began the farming, we ran across something called horticultural therapy. So until our generation, before that, hospitals or any place that healing was being given to the human body, they always had gardens. So veterans that were damaged, people that were, for whatever your issue was, hospitals always had gardens. And that was as an important part of the healing as anything else that could happen to the treatment. And of course, now with the fear of microorganisms, and you've seen hospital settings, how, frankly, to me, they're frightening, actually. They smell like disinfectant. The windows aren't open. The best thing anybody could do is get yourself outside, because when you handle plants, the plants are also transmitting this healing energy that begins that process of helping the body.
That's really powerful. And what is it about permaculture, Deb, and biodynamics that really attracted you to practicing that, to build the microbial life in the soil and to use those practices as some of your main foundations?
Well, Bill Mollison, who was and Barre and I both, studied this, but Bill Mollison, who's the Australian gentleman who really launched permaculture, he could see the damage done to the earth. Changes that perhaps when building or creating roadways or whatever the humans do, did not address the natural flow of water, the plant life that brought in rain. We all know that we've done a heck of a job to the earth. So permaculture was founded by Bill, when you say Barre, about going and re-looking at land and reshaping it. Sometimes you have to study it for a whole year almost, so to see where runoff is or if it's dry. I know one of the first stories I heard was cotton fields. We grew cotton in America, and cotton just was terrifying in what it was doing to the earth there. And this is post-World War II as well. They came in 2 years later with permaculture principles, replanting, changing the shape of the land and so forth by observing it, being good observers. And 2 years later, that whole system had healed. The earth was back vibrant and the soil was alive. So permaculture to us is just another form of healing, really, in essence.
Long before we were involved in permaculture, I was a student of Rudolf Steiner because I was involved in anthroposophical medicine. And again, just understanding nature's patterns and how they interact in the body. However, he was also the founder of biodynamics. And so that was my introduction through, biological studies with him, not firsthand, but his information. As far as, how you can recreate these cycles that Deb's referring to, it might involve animals, it might involve just recreating, looking at nature, mimicking an entire system. And Rudolf Steiner was called into early Europe, where the farmers were having a lot of failure, and it was really threatening the food supply of all Europe. So Rudolf came in with his biodynamic farming, taught the farmers, and everything started flourishing again. It involves not only animals, but beekeeping. I'm a beekeeper. And so you just, again, observe and then mimic. And Rudolf Steiner was a great master at that. So that was my first foray into just maybe going about gardening in a little bit more of a conscious way.
Right. So I'm hearing a couple of themes. One is to mimic nature and to really be an observer. And I'm sitting here and I'm imagining being a beginner gardener, even maybe somebody who's doing it for 10 or 20 years, and I'm wanting to just up level. And I'm hearing mimic nature. So help me understand what that looks like. Like I wanted to go to the nursery and grab some plants and plant them in my yard or garden, or I want to start my own seeds. And so how do I wrap my head around this mimicking idea? What does that look like practically?
I would say it's a combination of food, flower, and herbs all growing together. Now you can find companion plants. There's lists, there's information everywhere about companion plants. And depending on your climate, you find out what works best for you. Even if you're just doing container gardening, same principle: food, flowers, and herbs. And then also don't forget about those can be edibles as well. Besides the herbs and the food, the flowers can be edibles as well. And many of them are fantastic for pollination. Again, my one thing that I'd say is non-GMO. Look for the heirloom seeds. There's more and more companies, thank goodness, that are coming out with the original seeds before they were tampered with.
What was the classic Native American technique?
Oh, the Three Sisters. The corn, then the beans, having the corn as a trellis, and then the squash leaves shading because they're so large, shading the ground so that you're not using as much water. That's just, that one is, most people know of that one because that's one of the original companion planting, really.
Right. And I'd say a lot or most people know about it who are familiar with permaculture. People who are brand new and being introduced to it, it's like a brand, the three what? And another cool, the three sisters. So that's planting corn and beans and squash together. And another really cool one to throw in there if you wanted to put a flower is nasturtium, because they are they help with bug control, right? And
yes.
they're delicious.
Marigolds too, marigolds. But again, every season I look at new companies popping up, and it's just so exciting to see the people that are coming forth with seeds I've never seen before, ever. It used to be fairly boring and standard. Now it's getting exciting. The whole world of it's getting exciting.
Yeah, I agree, Deb. It is really exciting.
Well, if you're fortunate enough to have a greenhouse, and if you're, a little bit more upscaling into your gardening operation, then of course you gather your own seeds from your land every year. You propagate your own plants, and that's the way to go. And I'd say in this day and age, probably the most valuable thing if people want to prep is to store seeds and save their seeds.
You said something about, I'm not too sure. It's totally gone. Store seeds, prep seeds. Oh, I know, it was about the GMO, and it's important. So I just want to help pull apart and help people understand what GMO means. It's genetically modified organisms. So, and a lot of people, there's a bit of a misunderstanding about a hybrid plant versus a genetically modified plant. So would you like to describe what the genetically modified actually means?
Well, I'll handle the GMO, and then maybe you can do the hybrid.
No, I think GMO covers the hybridizing as well, actually.
Yeah. Well, if you look at just a little note, people like Luther Burbank, who was a very enlightened gardener, and he, of course, was responsible for creating many new species through hybridization. I think there's a place for that, as long as you're doing it in a way where you're not weakening the strains that you're using. And I also believe that mankind has a prerogative as stewards of this land to not experiment in a Frankenstein way, but to, create new species. But genetically modifying is totally different. Now you're in a laboratory creating gene splicing techniques through the use of synthetically produced retroviruses, and actually you're changing the creator's design is what you're doing. And I could go into all sorts of segues of how that's happening in our bodies too, but we won't go there. But genetically modifying not only is creating a change in the entire seed bank of the earth, but it's making it so that those seeds will not regenerate the same. They are considered foreign to our body. The little microbial helpers in our body will pleomorphically change into forms so that they can then gobble those things up and try to eliminate them from the body. So they're considered foreign invaders, and they really compromise, our entire internal ecology. And once they get in the food chain, then you're tampering with the food supply of the entire earth. Not a good idea. So you have some thoughts about hybridization? Do you want to?
No, you did
Okay.
it with Luther. I think
Okay.
that
Yeah.
there, I think the intention behind it too is he never wanted to diminish production of food versus the companies that we know of that basically want to that their food, the seeds won't reproduce if they fall in the soil. And then of course that's control of the entire food supply to mankind. So
Mhm.
Yeah, you're not tampering with
Yeah.
genetics, which makes it foreign to both the earth and our bodies.
Right. Yeah. And someone put in the chat that you can go check out CBAN, which like C and then BAN. And they help break down GMOs a lot. So just to summarize, Barre and Deborah, so if this was a seed, the genetically modified seed actually has other DNA blasted into it to make it behave in a different way. So genetically modified corn and soy, for example, can be sprayed with Roundup or glyphosate products, which kills everything. But this corn seed, which has now grown into this beautiful corn husk, survives that glyphosate. It survives the killing off of that poison. And so that's the kind of genetically modification that's happening. And it's the potatoes are they still genetically modified, or those are taken off? But they were genetically modified with a to kill the potato bugs. So they just die. The potato bug would bite them and they die. So that's genetically modification, and the hybridization is just it's not genetically altered in that way. So from genes being blasted. So thanks for that.
Right.
I'm curious about you talked about creating edible landscape by mimicking nature, planting what we grow, making sure we include herbs, and observing the landscape. And I'm curious, as a beginner gardener, if I wanted to just start somewhere and I didn't want to take a year or 2 years to watch my yard, where might I just kind of start? Like planting strawberries along the sidewalk. I love that idea. Another one I saw was planting tomatoes around the fence line. I thought that was a really cool hedgerow kind of idea. And I'm just wondering if you have any other kind of cool tips.
Well, there one program that I began teaching, it was a companion, it was OSU and the Oregon Food Bank had collaborated and created something called Seed to Supper. And they had this great workbook that was just from the foundational level up. It was to help families that wanted to grow their own food, but, did not know how to do it. The first thing mentioned in that workbook was the light. So wherever you want to do your garden, whether it's containers on a balcony or you've got a little tiny space. I know down in Los Angeles, there was a gentleman that started a program where he was doing road medians and using that for food. it is, observe the light. Look at how many hours a day once the time clock comes around, and observe that and the temperatures in different locations. Then you look at your soil. What's there? What kind of weeds are there? Can you dig down and find worms, or the quality of the soil? And that's what I would do first, is because the soil is everything because remember, you're going to be eating whatever's in that soil is going to come up through the food into your body. So I would say light, and look at your soil, and then of course your water source. And from that point, then you can jump into growing whatever is appropriate for that area.
And it's pretty obvious, when you just take a walk in the forest, that there's a lot of things growing together. There's not just monocrops out there. So that's the first clue. But then what Deb is talking about is pretty easy to achieve too, because there's online plenty of information as far as what kind of plants need what their light requirements are. And if you're planting a fruit tree now, it might take a couple years, but now you have a canopy for shade in the summer. Then you find that there's certain vegetables that don't like as much light. My Jiao Gulan plants, they don't like direct light. They like dappled light coming through the trees. So I make a point of growing them, under the canopy, under the peripheral, in our fenced in areas here. We have to have a lot of fenced in areas because we've got a lot of bear and deer and elk and all sorts of stuff running around. But I'm always just sure to, understand what those plants like. But at the same time, it does take a little bit of time. But if you just jump in as a novice, even if you're going to learn and know a lot more down the road and maybe learn from your mistakes as well, which we all do, you're still going to have a lot of success in your first time out of the blocks. You're going to have some great strawberries or great tomatoes or anything. And then with that, you're going to find, you might notice that the tomato plants over here, thrived a lot better than the ones over here. We, planted some blueberries years back, and ended up migrating them over to another part because they just weren't thriving. So, it's hard to get around just trial and error at the same time. But don't be afraid, like Deb says, just to jump in and do it, because, it'll be great from the beginning.
I love that. Thank you. I'm also curious, you have had your hands in the soil for decades, both of you. And what surprises you the most about what you're learning today about gardening and growing your own food?
You want to take that one?
I'd say I guess it was a surprise at the beginning, but it's, for myself, I have to be careful, because sometimes I thought which was a weed turned out to be a really wonderful medicinal plant that was popping up all over our land. And because I had not lived in the zone that we're in, which is 9. And I'd been primarily coastal. We'd been semi-tropical in Hawaii. We'd lived Mediterranean in Southern California. But now we're up in a whole nother river watershed area with forest around us. And there were plants that came up that I just thought they were a ground cover that was a weed. Got to get rid of those guys. Well, I found out that, Mother Nature has a plan. And by seeing those coming up naturally without me putting seed in the ground, that was great. I just loved it. I thought it's like a little mini miracle to me to see that happen.
That is so cool. Wow.
Another thing that I've just learned from my prior studies with the body is, everything is about electricity. Now, when I treat bodies, I do a lot of extensive in-house labs, and I'm looking at molecules and things, from samples from the body, but then I put it in an equation. It's called ionization analysis, that tells me the electrical resistance. So in a human body, it's not about cramming in all sorts of vitamins and supplements and things. It's about just doing these little tweaks that allow the electricity to flow in the least line of resistance, and then the body regains its health. Now, in the soil, I do the same kind of testing out there. And what you're doing is with a very minimal amount of amending, people, like if you're organic farming, you're just throwing tons of organic fertilizer on there, that may not be the best thing for the soil in the long run either. But if you create an electrical system, and I know this is a little more advanced, but you're creating a compatibility of the micronage between the soil and the rootlets, and then everything goes, a lot smoother and a lot cheaper, and things thrive. Now, for the people that don't know how to do all this testing, there's something that's trending right now. It's called electroculture. And so in our farm, we have copper coils going up poles, and we have those, about every 15 feet, especially in my vines and in all the planting beds. And what that does, if the copper coils are buried about a foot in the ground, it's acting as an antenna. And the old alchemists understood how everything's happening really above our heads. That's where it all comes from. But you're harnessing that atmospheric energy into the ground, and that spreads into the plant rootlets, and things thrive. Insects leave you alone. And it's just a wonderful, easy way. And you can go online, and even if you just got a tomato plant or something, you can just get a little thin stake and some copper and stick it in there. And, what's a magic happen? And things are, now you're honoring the fact that we live in an electrical universe.
Yes, I think that might be one of my favorite takeaways, Bear, because I I kind of grew up with this in curious sixth sense, and then I'll say God knocked me on the head when I was 20, and I was in a little car accident that left me with a concussion and being diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. And I thankfully met a polarity therapist at a dinner party, and regained my health in a very short time. Like within 10 sessions, I'm not 100%, but I was noticeably better, whereas I was getting worse and worse and worse before. And it was so powerful that I took every penny I had to go study polarity therapy, which is, I think you might be familiar with it. And Dr. Stone also studied the ancient hermetic sciences and
Yes.
naturopathic
He
and
was-
based, pardon me?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
he's an old osteopath, and I use his techniques forever.
Yeah, and it's based in energy medicine, and the premises is that our energy is our blueprint to our health, and we're learning more and more about the power of electricity and the power of energy. So thanks for bringing up the electroculture piece, and I see people are liking that in the chat too.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So I'm curious. We're going to move into Q&As here. And before we do, I'm wondering what advice you would have for the seasoned gardener, somebody who's been, hands in the soil for a long time, and they're just kind of curious about what they could do differently, or what they might want to experiment with or do next to kind of up level what they're doing and where they're at.
Well, if you're experienced, I would say, first off, you've learned, I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but with experience, you learn to trust your intuition. You learn to just trust your observation, and that if you, again, mimic, as we've been talking about, things just reveal themselves. So I'd say the only thing, as we've been around the block quite a bit, is we just always remember that we're forever students and we're not experienced.
Mhm.
I'd say that would be maybe the one word of advice is, and I'd say that with all things, whenever you think you've got something wired is usually when you don't. So you just kind of stay humble as a beginning student. And but with a little bit of experience, you do learn the patience. You do develop that just sixth sense about things. And the other thing, we're always studying, we're always learning from other people. So just don't, no matter how long you've been at it, don't stop your learning, just out, as far as practical experience. And then we're also, listening to other folks that are online, reading books, our favorite books, and Deb just got a whole stack of them in the mail, are books that were written way, way, way back when. And I study things from the 1600s. So I'd say for anybody in that situation, maybe just really start looking under different stones and learn as much as you can from as many people as you can.
Mm,
Yeah.
great advice. Love it. Let's move into Q&A. Leslie, is there a chat box, or are we going through the chat? I saw questions coming up in the chat.
There are questions coming through the chat today.
Just the chat. Okay. So I saw one, I'll see if I can go from top to bottom, but I saw one question about where you can get a Vortex. And I just wanted to touch on in biodynamics, people actually use their hands to stir the preparations, with their hand, and they create you put the biodynamic preparation, which is like a homeopathic like microbes, I guess you could say, and then you stir it in a and you create a vortex with your arm or with your stick, and then you go back the other way. So that is one way if you wanted to really connect more deeply with your practices. You could stir by hand. And what are some Vortex mixers that you'd recommend?
Well,
I'm not sure what ours is called. The
Yeah.
research was done at North Carolina, University of North Carolina. And we've had our Vortex for a long time. If you just look up online, what the Vortex does is because the outlets where you're just pumping in air, that's all it is. It creates an implosion. It's not just a stirring, it's an implosion technology. And again, Victor Schauberger, if anybody knows who he is, he's the one that discovered that. And it's really how all the forces of nature work. And I like the hand technique too, though. Low tech is good. And by going centripetally and centrifugally, what you're doing is you're mimicking nature's creation cycle, which is actually a toroidal field, which you have a centripetal, condensing of information that creates a precipitation of every matter living thing, and then it's going up in the opposite direction centrifugally to radiate, to grab the new informational fields, so that there's constantly a two-way toroidal field. So when you go in with your intention, your consciousness in your hand, and you're doing that, wonderful things are going to happen. The Vortex machine is going to create an amazing abundance of microorganisms and live microorganisms, but because you can keep it going forever, unlike other compost teas and things that just use bubblers, and then you need to run out in the garden because it doesn't make as many microbes and dump it on there while they're still alive. Well, what we found is the Vortex creates a lot more, but then when they die, then their encasements actually are wonderful fertilizers. So you get the live and the fertilization technique, and you can just keep the thing going perpetually. And then just, at the bottom of the spigot, take a gallon at a time and go use it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very cool. Thank you. Mary says that she would appreciate advice on controlling our lovely creatures that choose to enjoy a little too much of our vegetables. So deers, rabbits, chipmunks is what she's referring to.
Oh, the medium-sized animals, not the slugs and the snails and the earwigs. So she's talking about the medium.
Yeah.
I get the have-a-heart traps, put them out, catch them, and do a relocation. I don't want to kill anything because they also have a job to do, but we just do a lot of relocating because we have so many creatures here. I don't even know where to start. So relocation has been our choice of taking care of. Now the ground squirrels that we have here, the gray squirrels, they leave the garden alone, but we've had rabbits, we've had raccoons, we've had quite a few rats. So yes, relocation, great way to do it.
Okay,
Great way.
awesome.
And they go in right away. You leave them something tempting and you'll find them the next morning, guaranteed.
Awesome. That's great advice. And would love any, Mary also asked that she'd love to get any tips on Native American books on native plants, herbs, and their benefits.
I have found, because I'm an avid book lover and purchaser, that she, wherever she's living, that she finds she's bound to find books from her region and stick to her region, wherever that is. Mary, wherever you are, you will find books and information from there. eBay is actually a really good place to find used books. And I find some beauties that are just, as Bear said, I just had another stack arrive yesterday. But no, I found that most of the Native Americans have shared a lot of their information. And but many of them are older. You know, you're going to look at even the 1800s, the early 1900s, reach back that far for information.
Awesome.
Yeah, we're in the Pacific Northwest, and you know, all the bookstores in our area, you can't go in any of them without finding books about plants, wild crafting, you
Mushroom
name it, about the
gathering.
Pacific Northwest. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about if somebody's renting a property and not owning it, and they're just having trouble getting started? Where would you suggest for them to start?
Container gardening. There are some fantastic containers out there now. You know, you can use animal troughs, you can use recycled, you can my son actually built a wall planter with pallets. Bear and our oldest son did wall planters then they put food in them, but they attached them to the wall. And of course they put in there's great cloths now that are, non-toxic, and it's just, you can use burlap, there's just so many recyclable materials you can use to create planters of some type. And container planting is just as wonderful as an in-ground garden, I think.
Agreed. And what about for growing mushrooms? If it's too dry for growing mushrooms and just this is from Jessica. She says, if it's too dry for growing mushrooms in my area, to clean up the soil, do sunflowers work?
I honestly don't know. That's a great question.
It is.
Because we are surrounded by mushrooms. So I've never thought of it. I know the power of mushroom. I mean, it's cleaned up radioactivity, but sunflowers, that's a good research project. Please get a hold of me and let me know what you find out. I'd love to find that out.
Yeah, we've always lived in moist climates. We, raised our kids in the tropics. And so, we learned a lot there as far as what grows in tropical environments. And it's not what grows in, the Pacific Northwest, but you still have that moisture. So we've never planted in an arid area.
No. Yeah.
We have had a couple of conversations in the Heart and Soil community in some of the different magazine issues. And I think even in the Soil Summit, Leslie, you can confirm with me if this is true or accurate, more like it, is people have used corn to rebuild soil and to grow, like turn rock into soil, literally, the rock face, right, Leslie? And Jadam microbial solutions. It's a Korean natural farming practice. So making some jadam, and when you we actually are including that as a bonus session with the gardening summit with people who've upgraded to the VIP All Access Pass. So that's included in there, how to make it and how to use it. And you can get it for free on the internet. Just look up Jadam, Jadam. but we have a great interview with Brian Meisenbacher.
Mhm.
Is that right, Leslie? The
One-
corner piece?
So for cleaning up the soil with Korean natural farming, it's the indigenous microorganisms. We've Dr. Rob Blakemore is a scientist with a lot of research on worms cleaning up the soil. So
Mhm.
attracting worms by
Absolutely.
the microbial life in your soil. So
Yeah.
you know, I love how
Another,
how Barre and Deb are talking about that, about improving your soil health.
But worms are a given, and
Mhm.
you're okay. But for us, we'll hit triple digit temperatures here. So worms, you know, at about 85 degrees, they start, you know, going deep because it's hard for them to be in that hotter region. But yeah, worms are anything that goes out inside a worm and comes out the other end is clean of so much.
and
So much.
another technique you can do if you don't have mushrooms is you can purchase mushroom concentrates or mushrooms and make an infusion and actually soak the ground with that. That's what they did in Chernobyl to clean up the radiation. So you can still use mushrooms as well.
Mhm. And what mushrooms would you suggest buying to do that with?
I think chaga would probably be my favorite.
Okay, cool. You know, a question that's come in quite a bit is the different growing zones. So, and we have a room full of people from all over the world, tropical,
Mhm.
Pacific Northwest, Saskatchewan, where it's still snow up north, I'm sure. Um, and I'm just wondering, with that in mind, what is the most powerful thing that each of us can do in our own area that is universal in growing healthy, nutrient dense food and building our soil?
Back to the same.
It's you
Native
always, you know,
plants.
it's just like treating the body. You always go back to the fundamentals. You want to, you know, look at the microbes. You want to look at sunlight. You want to have pure water. You know, water is so important. And people that live on municipal systems, the chlorine and the fluorine in the water isn't really good for the plants. So if you can get some kind of filtration before you throw that on your plants, that would be great. Another fantastic thing is Vortex in your water. They have these little nozzles that'll restructure the water when it comes out the end of the hose. And it is shown to actually increase yields by 300% when you just put one of those on there. It'll actually clean up the water a little bit too, as well as restructuring. But yeah, go back to the basics: water, soil, and then the other thing I'm really favor is creating a favorable abundance of natural electricity in the soil. And that's where things like electroculture come in. If people want to get a little bit more advanced, and if you enjoy nerding out in different things, there's, you know, I do biogeometry where, you know, I can map out the ley lines in a given area, and there's different kinds of ley lines. Some are conducive to health and some aren't. So you know not to place things in certain areas. You know how to create the right orientation if you're planting a tree. That's a little bit more for the advanced student, but those are the things that are going to be the future of agriculture. And some of us are doing it all right now.
Mhm. So if we wanted to start with something simple, we'd put up the copper wires on the sticks, and then what would be the next step?
As far as the electroculture,
As far as the electroculture, yeah.
it's easy. You just get a pole, you know, and it can be a little thin one if you're just in a little container garden or something. Like us, if you actually have a lot of land, then, you know, we use, you know, like 4-inch poles and with 6-gauge wire. And then we do 9 coils with a little antenna coming up the top. And it doesn't have to be pyramids or any of this kind of, stuff like that, just the wire extending in a straight line. And then you bury it, in the case of a larger pole, about a foot in the ground. If you're in a little container, then maybe about 6 inches in the soil. Easiest thing in the world. And you can use a real narrow gauge wire, if you're in a small container. So you do it in a few seconds, stick it in there. That's all you need. The higher the antenna, the more energy you're going to pull. But usually about 6 feet is sufficient for anything. If you're in a tomato plant in a container, something that maybe goes up a foot is fine.
Mm. And if I had a yard, would I want to put one in each corner, or would I want to make a triangle, or does it really matter? Or do I put it around my garden?
An average coil is going to do like a 15 by 15 foot square, 225 square feet. So use that as a rule of thumb. Depending on the size, you might want a few of them. And of course, the more you have one in every square footage like that, the better it's going to work.
Okay. Another question from Andrea. When converting a patch of lawn to raised garden bed, what do you suggest to suppress grass? Example, cardboard, hemp mats, or other?
Yes. One of the first things that it's interesting, because I was just thinking, I thought I need to share this little tidbit. And one of the greatest things you can do is cardboard, because if you can cover up a certain area and have it go through the winter, and two things are happening. The grass it's not getting nutrients, so it won't continue to grow, but the worms love cardboard. I would just advise using cardboard that doesn't have any writing or dye or anything left on the outside. Just use plain cardboard. Plain cardboard boxes are fine. Just don't use the tape, and don't use dyed pieces of cardboard. But cardboard that's a fantastic tool. It really is. I hesitate to put anything petroleum products like a tarp. Anything that's made synthetic, I definitely would use the cardboard. We've had tremendous success with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I only started using cardboard on a larger scale this past couple of years, and it really works well. It's pretty cool. Before that, I'd only just made flower gardens in the city when I was living in the city, like a long time ago. But now doing big garden beds with cardboard, it's pretty magical. And if you want to learn more about some pro tips, you can tune into Charles Dowding's interview, because he goes into no dig and using cardboard, and give some really good extra tips in there. So another question from Mare. What are you doing about the toxic nanoparticles being released into the atmosphere by climate geoengineering? This is ending up in our air, soil, and water, and inevitably our food. What can we do?
Well, a lot of what we've already mentioned, making sure there's an abundance of microbes, because they do neutralize that, making sure that the electrical conductivity in the soil itself is in a proper range, because that is going to make it non-conducive for that kind of accumulation. And, and then mineralizing your plants. We favor things like azomite, just because it's sort of an all-in-one sort of preparation. And when you have, when you're remineralizing the soil with that kind of amendment, what it's going to do is, really make it, again, less compatible for those synthetics in there. And that's also where we use a little bit more of advanced techniques to neutralize that sort of thing with biogeometry, so that the plants and what you're growing are not going to be as affected by that. But no, it's a huge problem. And we live out literally in the wilderness off grid. And we're appalled when we go to civilization and we just see what they're doing, guys. But we still get, some chemtrails, and, we can tell when they're doing it. This is another more of a sort of a tech thing, but I'll just throw it out there for the heck of it. If you look at the work of Wilhelm Reich, you can get into cloud busters and things like that, and literally watch them dissipate, chemtrails dissipate in the sky. It works. And if you understand the science behind it, then you know it's not woo-woo. It's a real advanced science. And so the more of us that are learning these technologies that Reich put forth, then we're a lot of the things in the atmosphere before it reaches the ground. And we're also normalizing the precipitation patterns if they're trying to create a drought or a flood in some particular area, which is, commonplace now.
Mm-hmm. And can you try I'm not too sure. Can you give me context? Is it Nishita? It says, can you try a soda bottle to mix of a small amount? I'm just not too sure where that came into the conversation. What are your thoughts? This is also from Nishita. What are your thoughts on using buckets for gutter gardening?
Well, you want to handle it? I mean, the only thing I'd be concerned about is drainage, but it's just like any other container, huh?
Is she talking about using the buckets as a planter themselves, or is she talking about harvesting water and having water storage?
Yeah, I'm curious.
Okay.
Maybe give us a little bit more context on that. She also asked if we can eat the mushrooms after they've been used to clean up an area.
She replied, she's looking to see if you can use the buckets to grow.
So put them underneath the gutter and they're watered as the water fills them, or as the water as they grow.
Right. Well, I just immediately, our gutters pour so heavily, they're like rivers. So I can't see but if she's in an area where she has gentle rain, yeah, the only thing I'd say with those is with plastic too. Depends on the plastic. What kind of plastic, the heat on a plastic container, you don't know what chemicals you're going to set off.
Or certain kind of metals.
Yeah,
aren't like iron isn't the best thing. Not iron buckets, but even utensils. I mean, garden utensils ideally would be copper. They're going to imbue the best, energetics into the soil. But I know those are, we're here on a big piece of acreage, and it's hard to pull yourself up with pure copper stuff. But that would be ideal if you can find it.
another one
Yeah,
is
go ahead.
the cloth pot. They started
yeah.
manufacturing a cloth pot not many years ago. We've been here 9 years on this location. Probably about 12 or 13 years ago, they started with handles, cloth pots. And you can find some that are not going to give you any, they're great. They're movable. You can move them around depending if you need to change your light. I would prefer, if I was gardening, I would do that over the buckets. Of course, the buckets, you have to remember, if you're going to use them, drill a hole for drainage, of course, or several. But I'd probably go with the cloth pots. And if you shop around, you can get a really good price on them.
And the cloth pots breathe and they also drain.
Yes.
It's nice.
All right, we have a couple more questions, and I want to be mindful of time here too. So AJK Crean says that they started composting 2 years ago and finally hit black compost. I add coffee grounds, eggshells, and old bananas in a slurry. Would you add anything else? I'm excited to finally use the compost this year.
The compost, they do have organic, it's a powder, at least the ones I've seen, that you can add that will help and encourage that breakdown more quickly. So for compost, we go easy because we give it to our chickens, any of the leftovers, because we have so many creatures, bear, raccoon, fox, they'll break down a fence if if I had a big compost pit. So I give that leftover to my chickens. But if she's doing it and she doesn't have any problem, then I would, like I said, there's some great organic beneficial microbes that you can purchase to add to your compost, and it will speed that process up.
And you can also get red wigglers, worms sent to your doorstep for pretty
Yeah.
cheap. And if you have a large compost pile, I definitely prime it with some worms. And then, of course, they're going to multiply like crazy. We are going to do a vermiculture. We just developed another zone on our permaculture property here. And we are fabricating a whole large vermiculture culturing area. So we can make our own worm castings, because worm castings are fantastic for planting, as I'm sure everyone knows.
They are. I just want to make one quick comment on the composting too, is just to make sure it's well aerated as you're making it. I don't know how big your pile is. And it sounds like you're doing a great job. I just want to give you a shout out. You're noticing exactly what it needs. So keep going. One more question here from Vanessa. In container gardening, how and what can we use to build our soil?
Okay. I would say, first of all, look for an organic soil. Now, most organic soils will have, even if they're organic, they'll have vermiculite in it, a perlite in it, excuse me, sometimes vermiculite, but the perlite, which is white, and that's a naturally occurring amorphous glass, and it helps drainage. But in and of itself, I found that bales of organic soil don't have enough nutrients. So in tandem with that, I would purchase organic compost bags and worm casting and make a wonderful, yummy mix in each one.
Awesome.
Don't just stick with that organic, because soil is a lumber byproduct. And oftentimes, even if it's organic, you don't know how long it's been breaking down and sitting. So give it some nutrients. And if you're going to use chicken manure, which you can use also, just make sure it's aged, because that can burn your plants. But we pretty much will use compost, worm castings, and our soil together.
Awesome.
That's a quick start if you don't want to wait a long time to make your own soil. But when you start like that, not only can you begin gardening right away, but then that becomes natural soil, in and of itself. And then, it gathers worms and the microbes, and then you're in business. So you aren't dependent on buying bags of soil and plastic and everything. But in a pinch, that'll get you started. I'd also add azomite, because you really need minerals, and azomite's kind of the easiest one for anybody. You don't have to know that much. It's got everything in there. And, minerals are important.
Go check out Barre and Deborah's farm, Alpha Vedic, on the web at alphavedic.com. And you can follow them on Instagram and learn more about their story on Facebook, both at Alpha Vedic. And you can follow them on their podcast at alphavedic.com/alphacast. Deborah and Barre, thank you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your heart and your life experience in gardening and healing through the soil and healing through connecting with nature. So thank you for everything and your time. Appreciate you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Great chatting with you all.
You make yourself an amazing day, and thanks for joining us for the Gardening Summit.